After being adopted in the early 70s, Amber Dawn Lee experienced an unorthodox childhood. Her parents, once freewheeling hippies, suddenly found religion and joined the Mormon Church, then veered away from the faith, taking young Amber and her sisters with them.
My parents started moving towards the more extreme fundamental groups. They were looking for something that was true to them, for a place to belong. They were really just kind of like cult jumping.
But as Amber's father grew ever more radical, he began having trouble at work.
My dad started having a harder time holding down a job, and he became paranoid. My parents' financial situation started getting worse and worse. Everything became really chaotic.
Finally, the worst happened. The family became homeless.
We lost our house, and something within me knew at that moment that everything in my life was going to change. At that point, we lived in a lot of different places. We lived in the woods in a tent for a while.
They started living out of the car or out of a storage unit, looking for food out of trash cans, not knowing when or where the next meal was coming from.
Amber hated it. She was really upset and, wanted to run away.
I knew something was really wrong. I didn't want to eat out of a dumpster. I didn't want to struggle for survival with my parents anymore. Nothing felt solid and secure.
So in the early 80s, after 2 rootless years, Amber was relieved when her father moved the family to a stable community in Ogden, Utah. It was a polygamous fringe group called the Zion Society, but to Amber, it was the promised land.
The Zionist Society was a new, up-and-coming splinter group in this little small cul-de-sac neighborhood, and everything about the group seemed to be perfect. The children had their hair curled in pretty little dresses.
Every blade of grass was perfectly cut. Every flower was perfectly placed. It really was lush and beautiful.
And for good reason. The shepherd of these pastures was former landscaper turned self-proclaimed prophet, Arvin Shreve.
Arvin looked like a normal person that you would see on the street. Short glasses, just a kind of a normal looking guy, I guess.
Arvin Shreve looked like this kindly grandfather, this little roly-poly old man with a kind, gentle face.
You wanted his attention, you wanted him to like you because he just seemed very contained and in charge. He had a demeanor of knowledge. Everything had order. There was nothing off schedule. It was really comforting that somebody would tell me what I was supposed to do next.
For young Amber, the newfound stability was a dream come true.
If you go from homeless to all of a sudden you're in a house, there's a lot of food to eat, then you're happy. When new families would come in, they would separate the family right away and put each girl or each boy in a council. So I was put into the Arvin Shreve Council, which meant that I was going to be his wife when I came of age.
To prepare for her role, Amber was assigned a mentor, a woman named Sharon Kapp.
Sharon Kapp was the head of one of the sister councils and had a lot of control over a lot of the women and children.
Sharon was one of Arvin's wives. Arvin trusted her. When I was with Sherry, I felt very safe because she's close to the prophet. Sharon taught that it was a really good thing to keep Arvin happy.
And one thing that made the prophet happy was attractive female followers.
We all had to stay really thin and up to the approval of the prophet. The women would weigh in so that they could keep at a certain weight.
But there were other things that began making Amber uneasy. For starters, it had become hard to see her parents.
One afternoon, I started walking around the corner to where my parents were staying, which was 3 houses away. The adults stopped me, like, "Where are you going?" I'm like, "I'm gonna go say hi to my mom." And they're like, "No, you can't. It's not on your schedule to see your mom today."
But the biggest surprise came when the ladies of Zion introduced a new clothing style to Amber.
I was part of the sewing team, so I would go and spend a few hours every day sewing.
Amber and the other children within these groups, they would be sewing lingerie.
I thought I was just sewing for, sisters or friends. I had no idea that we were doing it as a business. They were actually selling them to the local strippers.
But this was more than just a micro-enterprise. Skimpy garments suddenly turned up in Amber's dresser.
When I opened up my drawer, there were lines of panties. All perfect and frilly, my parents would always teach us about modesty. And then in this group, the panties were lacy with little words like naughty written on them. And it was like, why do we get these grown-up panties as kids?
Still, for an innocent girl who craved nice things, it didn't quite cross the line.
I was a little bit nervous, but I was a little bit excited. Everything matched, and it was really pretty. I was still the little girl that was looking at the lace and the colors, not the strings that were really behind it.
But soon the strings began to pull.
Sherry Cap would dress all of us children in lingerie, me and like a 3-year-old and my other friends who were 12, and they would teach us how to put on lingerie shows.
And the modeling took an unmistakably dark turn.
They would call in Arvin, and we would perform for the Prophet. I knew then that something just is not right. I was told not to tell my parents what was going on. It was because they said my parents were not yet at the stage that I was, spiritually, that I had evolved, so I got to learn more.
But Amber's parents did become suspicious, and their attempts to protect their girls would leave a family torn in two.
She had chosen the evil she knew versus the evil she didn't.
And when the compound's front door slammed shut, true darkness descended.
I was beyond tearful. I was just numb. When the alarms went off, it was like all hell broke loose.
In the mid-1980s, young teen Amber Dawn Lee was growing uneasy in the Zion Society. She had just been forced to model racy lingerie for the so-called prophet Arvin Shreve. It didn't seem right, but Amber was too grateful for the stability at Zion to rock the boat.
I wasn't afraid that we weren't going to have dinner. I wasn't afraid that I wouldn't have anything to wear. And I felt protected and taken care of.
Geez, just always wanted some semblance of a normal life, to have a house and some kind of balance.
So Amber was horrified when she heard her father risk everything one day by arguing with the prophet.
I was in my house when I heard my dad yelling, "You get her out here," and that I was his daughter and that Arvin had no right to keep me there. And I went out the front door, and my dad was in the street, and my younger sisters were in the car. My dad was very suspicious about something going on, and he packed up, like in that moment. Alarms were going off. Men came running from every direction towards my dad, surrounding him, and they were like, "You better get out of here, you better get out of here." It was a really, really scary thing for me. I didn't want my dad hurt.
Amber faced her biggest crossroads.
Basically, at that point, I could have run to the car and say, "I'm leaving with my parents," but I didn't want to struggle for survival with my parents anymore.
So she told them to go, and reluctantly they did.
Amber watched as her father drove away.
I was beyond tearful. I was beyond fainting. I was just numb. When I woke up the next day, it was taboo for me to talk about my parents. It was as if they never existed.
Amber had to go on, so she focused on her routine and swallowed her pain. But as Amber buckled down, Zion handed her a new priority.
After my family left, they became more brazen. They started grooming me to become a wife of Arvin Shreve.
Most religious groups prepare young women for family life, someday. But at Zion, the lessons began fixating on filth instead of faith.
Sharon was in charge of teaching all of the young girls and the children the SWOL, which was the acronym for the sexual way of life. It was her job, given to her by the prophet and by God, to teach sexuality to everyone else.
And Sharon's teaching methods were a little unorthodox. She and her sisters would entice the children into playing games. But these were no ordinary games.
You'd have this game called Rape in the Dark, where basically instead of truth or dare, it was just dare, where people were told to have some sort of a sexual relationship with somebody that was in the room at the time.
The women in the group were all ages, and you would see a 70-year-old woman holding hands with a 16-year-old girl.
The girls were told to practice things like French kissing with one another.
It's really just extreme sexuality. It became such a part of every single thing within the group that all of a sudden I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin.
Amber tried to keep in mind that Arvin and Sharon knew God's plan.
There were eternal companions for Arvin that were older. And then I thought, well, someday I'm gonna, be his favorite wife.
But then someday came a lot sooner than she expected. One by one, Amber's young friends were sent to the prophet.
They would fix them all up and push them out across the street to Arvin's.
Then it was Amber's turn to cross the street.
I was trying to prove myself to them. If I was thrown out at that point, where would I go? My family was already gone. I was on my own.
And Sharon had trained her well.
Arvin was somebody that I loved and feared at the same time. So when it was time, going across the street was like going down the aisle. I was going from one life into another. And once I crossed that street, then my innocence would be forever gone.
That night, Amber became prey for Zion's man of prayer.
Arvin Shreve raped me, and he hurt me. But I felt like my innocence had already been taken a long time before that actual night happened. The months of training and brainwashing, I think that actually did so much damage. It was almost like I just wanted it to get over with.
But Arvin's rapes continued. Amber tried to distract herself with tasks and routine, but she couldn't escape the hard life she saw stretching out ahead of her.
I've been raped. I've been working really hard, and I was not feeling any joy. It was just do what you're supposed to do.
But just a few months later, Amber's life changed dramatically once again.
Somebody came running into the house saying, "Social services is here, and they're here for you."
It turned out Amber was not forgotten when her parents left Zion.
I don't know how the discussions went down, but somebody told me, "You need to pack and go."
Authorities had come to return her to her family. No one knew who had sent them, but Amber was too relieved to ask questions.
I was excited and scared at the same time because I didn't want anybody in the group to think that I wanted to go. And all along hoping that social services actually had the power to take me.
Social services got no resistance from Arvin. Amber was handed over quickly and quietly. But after spending her formative years at Zion, Amber now faced an alien world.
I was caught up in a tornado of darkness.
And as she struggled to find her footing, Zion's walls were about to crumble.
The raid was out of this world.
Nobody had any idea what was really going on.
They thought it was a fortress, but the walls were coming down.
In the mid-1980s, social services had removed Amber Dawn Lee from Zion and from the clutches of so-called prophet Arvin Shreve. No one would ever know who had called authorities, but one thing Amber did know was that she was ready to see her family again, until her hopes were crushed.
I was taken to New Mexico because that was the last known place of where my parents lived, but they were not there anymore.
With no parents to claim her, Amber went into a succession of foster homes as she entered public school.
It was really scary going into high school for the first time. I was not socially normal. I didn't know how to do any of the schoolwork. I didn't know some of the basic things, like, really, people went to the moon? I was an observer. I would just watch what everybody else was doing and try to fit in. I didn't tell anyone, not one person, where I came from.
The strain of hiding her past and the turmoil of foster care took their toll on Amber. She dropped out of school and hit the skids.
I was stuck in the underworld, really caught up in a tornado of darkness and doing drugs so that I could numb myself from thinking or remembering or anything.
Meanwhile, back in Utah, Ogden police had been watching Arvin and his Zion cult. And Arvin finally made a mistake.
Arvin Shreve brought in a divorced woman and a young child, and the father wanted to make sure that his child was safe. The man hired a private investigator, claimed that she was in the business of buying lingerie. She was able to get this amazing video of these 13-year-old girls to 40-year-old women modeling see-through lingerie.
It was the smoking gun investigators needed.
On August 2nd, 1991, law enforcement raided the Zion Society. They took adults into custody, and then they took the children into foster care.
As Zion crumbled, evidence mounted.
You had people coming forward saying that these children were being groomed to sexually satisfy Arvin Shreve and other adults within the Zion Society.
Investigators found over 750 instances of ritual child sex abuse at Zion. The cult's youngest victim was only 3 years old. With no hope of acquittal, Arvin Shreve and sidekick Sharon Kapp both plea bargained. Each got 20 years in prison.
It's a good thing to know that Arvin Shreve is not able to hurt anyone again, because what he did was absolutely monstrous.
But when the news of Zion's fall reached still struggling Amber, she was stunned.
The raid to me was really something out of this world. I couldn't even believe it. These people that I had been so close to for so long were going to be spending the rest of their lives in prison. It was unreal to me.
But the news was real, and as she absorbed it, Amber saw just how serious Arvin and Sharon's crimes had been. With the help of therapy, she realized how those crimes had shaped her own path.
I had to really take a good look at what my life was and why I had lived the life I had. And I really had to figure out my next steps. I stopped using drugs. I went to college and found just a normal life that didn't revolve around being numb.
Though Amber found her footing, Arvin Shreve left her with serious scars.
Arvin Shreve raped me. I have nights when I can't go to sleep, and that's a result of laying next to Arvin, not wanting to move because I don't want him to wake up, not wanting to go to sleep because then I won't be in control. So it never leaves you.
Despite her scars, today Amber enjoys a healthy life. She moved to LA for a career in acting and filmmaking. She found love and married a real husband.
He turned out to be a really stand-up guy. He loved me until I learned how to love myself.
It's been this slow process of saying, hey, I am going to be there for you, and this is real.
She's also reconnected with her family. In the summer of 1995, 18-year-old Lisa Jefferson was a young mother in transition. After ending a relationship with the father of her 2-year-old son, she made the tough call to move from Texas back to her hometown of Syracuse, New York, for a fresh start.
I think it was a lot that I was missing my family. They were everything to me. Then I had my grandmother on the phone saying, come home to grandma so that I can take care of you. And I had to make a decision. It was not an easy thing.
Lisa's grandmother welcomed her and her son Carlos Jr. into her home with open arms.
I'm starting over again, but I'm happy to start over again. I was focused on how I was going to rebuild my life with my son.
But there were plenty of men whose sole focus was on her. And one in particular, Cecil Torrance, a neighbor in Lisa's apartment complex, was determined to make an impression.
Cecil was a very handsome guy. Now, he was tall, he was dark. He was such a charming guy, but I wasn't looking to get into another relationship really fast, and I just wanted to be kind of free.
Cecil just kept wanting to get a date. He would do anything that she wanted to do just to, to grab her attention.
But after several weeks of casual flirting, Lisa finally gave in to Cecil's advances and was pleasantly surprised.
He would always take me out to eat, and we'd have good conversation. He was definitely rough around the edges, and I kind of liked it. Nobody was going to push him around.
Cecil worked in construction and had 2 little girls of his own. Even though they lived with his ex, he seemed to be just as devoted a parent as Lisa. Soon, Cecil and Lisa became more than just friends.
I fell head over heels for him. People knew that was Cecil's girl, and it kind of made me feel important.
It all happened really fast. He treated her like a princess.
When Lisa landed a job at a department store, it seemed like life was going her way.
And I started to say, okay, girl, you got the looks, now you got demand. You can provide for your child, and the confidence definitely started to grow.
And in April of 1996, when Lisa discovered she was pregnant with a boy, she was overjoyed by Cecil's excited reaction to the news.
Cecil said, we're going to be a family. We're going to bring Carlos Jr., and we're going to move in together. We were picking out colors together and just high anticipation of the birth of his first boy.
On Christmas Day of 1996, Lisa and Cecil received a very special delivery, Cecil Jr. Lisa thought she had it all. Unfortunately, her family thought otherwise.
Once she had the baby and they moved in together, I think that's when all the change came. The not going out, the not being around the family, and gotta cook and clean, and everything has to be ran accordingly. I didn't like that at all.
Cecil was a very jealous guy. One time a coworker invited me and a couple other girls to her house for dinner. He called my phone about 50 million times while I was there, arguing with me about something that was so minute. I couldn't understand it, but then it clicked to me. Cecil is very insecure.
So when Lisa got home, she assured Cecil that she only had eyes for him, and that seemed to do the trick.
He's apologizing. He's sorry. I love you. Just stay home with me.
In those moments, Lisa fell in love with her man all over again, despite her family's disapproval.
I loved Cecil. I loved him. I loved our family. I loved the life that we were trying to build. And I wanted the American dream.
In the summer of 1999, Lisa Jefferson and her boyfriend Cecil Torrance were enjoying watching their blended family grow.
We actually moved into a new place. Carlos Jr.'s in school now. And I found a new job at a customer service company. And so everything's going good.
And Cecil's jealous tendencies had all but disappeared. He was quite the doting dad.
Cecil would watch the boys while I was at work. Cecil was an excellent father.
And when Cecil landed a construction job with potential for growth, the young family was on their way.
Cecil is getting paid a lot of money. I'm feeling good about myself. He's feeling good about himself. We're a little power couple. There was just that one piece missing. I wasn't Mrs. Torrance.
So in the summer of 2001, after adding their second baby boy to the blended family, the couple decided it was time to make their union official. In the fall of 2001, Lisa walked down the aisle and into the arms of her adoring Cecil.
It wasn't a big, extravagant wedding, but it was a very beautiful, beautiful day. I was over the moon.
He was happy, she was happy. They looked great together.
Life was good for the newlyweds, until 2 months later when Cecil suddenly lost his job.
Cecil started to change when he got laid off.
But while Cecil struggled to find work, Lisa excelled at her job and was promoted to the HR department of her company.
It definitely gave me a different sense about who I was. I started to really become very confident. I started to recognize that I am very smart, bright, and I can be a very independent woman.
But Lisa started to notice that the better she did, the worse her new husband was doing.
And after applying over and over again at different organizations and getting no feedback, I think it just killed his spirits. And that's when everything started going downhill. He's staying out very late at night, coming in at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, drunk. It started to really, really affect our relationship.
One day in January of 2003, Cecil took his drunken debauchery too far.
Cecil comes home at 5 o'clock in the morning with friends. They're drinking, they're kind of loud. I'm upset. And I look at Cecil, I said, what's going on here? What are you doing? And he's like, oh, just go to bed, babe. You know, everything's gonna be fine. They'll be out of here in a little while. I wake up to Cecil passed out drunk and his pager's going off. So I decided that, okay, it must be important. Let me call this person back. I ended up calling the number back and it was a female's voice.
Lisa was furious, and for once, she demanded to know where Cecil had been. And that's when Lisa's husband exploded with a fury she had never seen before.
He grabbed me by my hair and he started punching me in my face. I was scared and I couldn't get away from him. There was nowhere for me to run. There was nowhere for me to hide. And he wouldn't stop. I'm begging him to please stop. You're gonna kill me. He didn't care.
Cecil finally relented and left the room. Lisa quickly called 911. Cecil spent the next 2 days in jail, while Lisa stayed with family, nursing 2 black eyes and a fractured nose.
I couldn't believe it. He came across as a kind person. He didn't give off any indication that he was just a volcano ready to erupt.
Lisa pressed charges, and Cecil was ordered to attend 6 months of counseling. 1 week later, when Lisa returned home to pick up a few necessities, Cecil was waiting and singing a different tune.
He was begging and pleading and crying, and I'm like, no, no, no. Look what you did to me. How could I come back to you?
Sorry. I'm so sorry.
He's like, I was drunk and, you know, I didn't know what I was doing. I love you. I'm going to counseling now, crying.
Horrified by the violence Cecil had shown, Lisa was prepared to walk away. But the thought of breaking up her family was too painful to bear.
I didn't want to be a single mother. My mom was a single mother. I want my boys to have something I didn't have, which is a father and a mother in the same household.
So Lisa felt compelled to give her family a second chance.
He went to counseling where he learned about empathy, what triggers him to become this way. He did great and everything started to get on the right path.
He showed her he could be the perfect man for her and her kids.
Lisa was happy to put the ugly chapter behind them and plan for the family's future. But Cecil had plans of his own.
The violence certainly escalated, and it led to the worst act that you could imagine.
And before Lisa could see the truth hiding behind his sinister eyes, her world would change forever.
As blood splattering everywhere, I just knew that would be my last time here on Earth.
In the summer of 2005, after her husband Cecil went through counseling for striking her, Lisa Torrance decided to give him one more chance for the sake of their kids.
He was going to be a better husband to me in every way, shape, or form.
And even though Cecil had failed to land a job, it seemed he'd found his true calling at home.
Cecil would clean the house, prepare meals. He would do the boys' homework with them, wash clothes. He was an all-around Mr. Mom.
And Cecil had started making a name for himself as a winning coach on his boys' basketball and football teams.
He took a lot of pride in coaching his kids and the community's kids. People liked Cecil. They wanted their kids to be on Coach Cecil's team.
Life in the Torrance household was better than ever, especially when Lisa was able to buy her family a new home.
She was living the American dream. She was married, she had a family, she had a beautiful home, she had nice cars in the driveway, bank account. Everyone looked at their life as a fairy tale.
And on June 4th, 2007, the family was thrilled to welcome a third son into the world. But what should have been a time for celebration became quite the opposite.
He was still not able to find work, and my career was just blossoming, and Cecil's not happy, arguing with me all the time about where I'm wanting to go, who I'm wanting to go with. His control was at an all-time high.
Lisa had been down this road before with disastrous consequences and was not about to do it again. But she had her family and her future to think about. So in 2008, Lisa went to work on herself.
I started going to the gym. I lost tons of weight. I decided I was going to go back to school to work towards getting my degree. My job is going well. I have my home. The boys are good. Everything is good besides my marriage.
By the summer of 2009, Lisa had found her stride, but Cecil didn't exactly embrace her newfound independence.
He's coming into bars where I told him I was gonna be, and he's making scenes. He's going through all of my social network applications.
That took a toll on her. She just basically got tired of being underneath his thumb.
I was not gonna allow him to control me any longer. I was done.
So on February 28th, 2010, Lisa packed up the kids and headed to her friend's house, bracing herself for Cecil's reaction. But surprisingly, a week later, Cecil called and agreed their marriage was over.
Cecil was very calm, and he said to me, I know that we're breaking up. I know that the marriage is done. He just wanted me to bring his children back home for these next couple days so that he could spend time with his boys before he actually had to leave the household. And I agreed to come back.
But Lisa made it very clear to Cecil she was there for the sake of the children, not for him.
When I came back, I was very cold, very withdrawn from him, and we weren't, really talking.
The following morning of March 4th, 2010, Lisa got her oldest boys off to school as usual.
I take my 2-year-old and I sit him on the bed, and I go into the bathroom. I put my cell phone on the counter, I take off my robe, and I get into the shower and I close the glass doors.
But nothing could have prepared Lisa for what would happen next.
Cecil comes in, closes the door behind him, he slides the glass door to the side, and he points a black handgun in my face.
On the morning of March 4th, 2010, Lisa Torrance was begging for her life as her husband Cecil pointed a gun in her face.
I'm scared. I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, he's gonna kill me.
Lisa was paralyzed by fear, knowing their 2-year-old son was in the next room.
Cecil pistol whipped me. And he shatters the shower glass doors, blood splattering everywhere.
Cecil pummeled his wife for the next 30 minutes until their toddler knocked on the door.
And he starts saying, "Mommy, Daddy, open the door." So I'm yelling, "Mommy loves you."
Heartbroken and focused on her children, Lisa pleaded with Cecil as a parent.
I said, "What about our kids? If I'm dead, what about our kids? I won't tell the police." And he says to me, "Are you crazy?" Then he shot me. I felt my left femur bone being shattered. And he shot me again. I'm yelling, "Please, oh my God, I'm in so much pain."
Cecil shot his wife 4 times before grabbing her cell phone and fleeing with their 2-year-old son. He had left the mother of his children to die, but Lisa was dead set on staying alive.
I said to myself, if you're gonna die, you're gonna die trying to live. So I managed to crawl out of the tub. I couldn't walk, so my leg was dangling. I crawled down the first flight of stairs. I was in so much pain, so much pain. And then I crawled down the second flight of stairs. At this point in time, I'm in and out of consciousness.
After dragging her mangled body out of the house, Lisa collapsed in her yard. Minutes later, her neighbor discovered her and called 911. With Lisa's life hanging by a thread, word of the horrific early morning attack started to spread.
Next thing I know, my cousin nudges me. He says, "Get up, wake up." And he said, he shot her. Cecil shot Lisa. And I ran out the room, repeating what he said. Cecil shot my sister. Cecil shot my sister. It killed me.
Lisa was rushed to the hospital while police searched for Cecil Torrance and their 2-year-old son.
There was no question they considered Cecil armed and extremely dangerous. There was concern over the safety of the children.
Police canvassed the area and discovered that Cecil had taken his youngest son to his mother's house before going into hiding.
When the police responded to Cecil's mother's house, their 2-year-old son was taken to the youth division of the Syracuse Police Department for safety, just in case Cecil had further contact with the mother.
While police pounded the pavement in search of Cecil, Lisa awoke from her 5-hour surgery to utter chaos.
My family members were coming in and, they had tears in their eyes. And I have detectives in my room. I'm in the hospital under an alias. People are, scared for my children because they're afraid that he might try and come and kidnap them, maybe take them as a hostage.
I was scared. The hospital was on lockdown because they didn't want him to come in and try to finish the job.
After an exhaustive 30-hour manhunt, police received an anonymous tip about Cecil's whereabouts.
Cecil was apprehended at a friend's house. And the police found him hiding under a pile of clothes in a closet.
When I found out Cecil was arrested, I felt relieved. It felt like the boogeyman was gone. And with the help of God, I took everything in me and I fought hard for my life.
After 6 days in the hospital and 4 months in rehabilitation, Lisa made a full recovery. On February 14, 2011, Cecil Torrance pled guilty to second-degree attempted murder and was later sentenced to 18 years in jail.
I was happy. I knew that this was the start of a brand new Lisa, because I was one of the lucky ones. There's a lot of people who don't make it out.
Today, Lisa now recognizes Cecil for the troubled man that he was.
I never viewed myself as a victim because it was happening so far and few in between. No one could have never, ever told me that he would try and take my life from me.
It wasn't her time to go. She was determined to live. He just made her stronger.
Now Lisa volunteers with a local agency dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence.
I try and reach young kids who are going through things like that and get them to understand that, you know what, just because he says he loves you doesn't mean that he won't hurt you.
There is a profound and specific kind of isolation that defines the scattered territories of the South Pacific Ocean, a vast expanse of deep blue water that serves simultaneously as a protective barrier and an unyielding boundary. American Samoa, a breathtakingly beautiful archipelago and an unincorporated territory of the United States, exists within this unique geographical and cultural paradox. It is a place where ancient Polynesian traditions, deeply rooted in respect, community, and tribal harmony, meet the complex and often turbulent realities of the modern world. Within this territory lies the village of Vaitogi, a coastal settlement renowned for its rugged, untouched natural beauty. The shoreline of Vaitogi is defined by its pristine, razor-sharp coral reefs, ancient geological formations that have stood against the relentless pounding of the Pacific waves for millennia. These reefs are not just a geographical feature, they are the soul of the village, representing a natural order and a peaceful permanence that the local inhabitants have respected for generations. The air in Vaitogi is heavy with the scent of sea salt and tropical flora, and the rhythmic sound of the ocean crashing against the coral traditionally provided a serene soundtrack to a quiet, undisturbed way of life. However, beneath the surface of this idyllic tropical sanctuary, a darker, more insidious current was beginning to flow in the late 1980s. The geographical location of American Samoa made it a vital hub for maritime activities, particularly the commercial fishing industry. Massive fishing vessels from various corners of the globe docked in the territory's harbors, bringing with them vital economic opportunities, but also a hidden, dangerous cargo. The ports, busy with the loading of tuna and the refueling of international fleets, became porous entry points for an underground economy. It was an open secret that these maritime networks were increasingly being exploited to smuggle illegal contraband into the islands. Among the most destructive of these smuggled goods were illicit firearms. The influx of illegal weapons fundamentally altered the social fabric of the territory, introducing a deadly new variable into local disputes that had, for centuries, been settled through customary tribal mediation and the wise counsel of village elders. The sudden availability of untraceable handguns meant that simmering grievances no longer needed to be resolved through dialogue or traditional restitution. They could be ended violently, anonymously, and instantly in the dark. This influx of black market weaponry posed a direct and existential threat to the peaceful existence of the local tribes, acting as a grim harbinger of modern, mechanized violence invading a deeply traditional society. By the summer of 1989, this rising tide of imported violence had reached a critical mass, casting a long, dark shadow over communities like Vaitogi. The proliferation of illegal firearms emboldened those who sought to bypass the traditional laws of the island and exert control through fear and intimidation. At the center of this shifting power dynamic was the Siamo family, a local crime syndicate that had grown increasingly notorious within the territory. The Siamo name carried a heavy, ominous weight among the islanders. They were a deeply entrenched criminal organization, utilizing the changing landscape of American Samoa to consolidate their influence. The presence of such an organization in a small, interconnected island community created an atmosphere of pervasive tension. In a place where everyone knew their neighbors and familial lineages were common knowledge, avoiding the reach of a powerful criminal family was nearly impossible. Disagreements and disputes that might have once been minor neighborhood quarrels now carried the lethal potential of organized retaliation. It was within this fragile, increasingly volatile environment that an ordinary local resident named Samini Lu found himself entangled in a dangerous, simmering dispute. The specific origins of the conflict between Samini Lu and the members of the Siamo family remained obscured by the complex, often silent social codes of the island, but the animosity had been building over time. It was not a sudden burst of anger, but rather a slow, deliberate accumulation of hostility. In an island community, a simmering dispute is a suffocating experience. There is nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and no way to simply disappear into a crowd. Every intersection, every local store, and every stretch of the coastal road holds the potential for an unwanted encounter. For Samini Lu, the weight of this ongoing conflict with a notorious crime family must have been an ever-present burden, a constant source of anxiety that colored his daily life in Beitogi. The underlying tension finally reached its violently inevitable conclusion on the evening of July 12, 1989. The night had descended upon the village of Beitogi, bringing with it the enveloping darkness that is unique to regions located so close to the equator. Away from the artificial glow of large cities, the night in a village like Beitogi is absolute, illuminated only by the moon and the stars, and governed by the sound of the ocean striking the ancient coral reefs. It was an environment that offered perfect concealment for someone harboring lethal intentions. As the evening progressed toward 9:45, the usual activities of the village would have quieted down, leaving the dirt roads and pathways largely deserted. At exactly 21 hours and 45 minutes, the serene tranquility of the Beitogi night was violently shattered. The perpetrator, a member of the Siamo crime family, had carefully orchestrated an ambush. An ambush requires patience, malice, and a cold calculation of the victim's movements. The assailant had utilized the shadows and the natural landscape of the village to lie in wait, tracking Samini Lu's path. The use of an ambush indicates a severe escalation from a mere dispute to a premeditated act of violence. It strips the victim of any opportunity to defend themselves, to de-escalate the situation, or to even recognize the impending danger until it is far too late. As Samini Lu moved through the dark, familiar surroundings of his home village, he was entirely unaware that he was walking into a meticulously laid trap. From the concealing darkness, the assailant emerged, closing the distance between himself and his target. The weapon chosen for this execution-style attack was a .22 caliber handgun. In the realm of firearms, the .22 caliber is often underestimated due to its relatively small size, but it is a highly lethal and favored weapon in the criminal underworld. It is easily concealed, produces a relatively suppressed muzzle report compared to larger calibers, and the ammunition is incredibly cheap and easy to smuggle. When fired at close range, it is devastatingly effective. This specific weapon, undoubtedly part of the illegal arsenal smuggled through the commercial fishing vessels, represented the exact sociological plague that was threatening the island. It was a piece of cold, unfeeling machinery brought from the outside world to inflict harm upon the local population. Without warning, the member of the Siamo family leveled the smuggled handgun at Samini Lu and pulled the trigger. The crack of the gunshot echoed against the coastal winds, a sharp, unnatural sound that cut through the rhythmic noise of the coral reefs. The projectile struck Samini Lu directly in his left foot. The physical trauma of a gunshot wound, even to an extremity, is immediate, agonizing, and profoundly debilitating. The high-velocity impact of the lead bullet tearing through flesh, muscle, and potentially striking bone causes instantaneous shock to the human nervous system. Samini Lu collapsed, the victim of a ruthless and cowardly attack, bleeding into the soil of his own village. The ambush had been swift and brutal, a stark demonstration of the power and ruthlessness of the local crime syndicate operating with the aid of imported, illegal firepower. Despite the suddenness and the severity of the attack, Samini Lu survived the initial trauma. The immediate aftermath of the shooting was a chaotic race against time to preserve his life and prevent catastrophic blood loss or subsequent infection. He was urgently transported away from the dark, isolated coastal roads of Beitogi and rushed to the LBJ Tropical Medical Center. The medical center, named in honor of the former United States President Lyndon B. Johnson, stands as the primary healthcare and trauma facility for the territory of American Samoa. Upon his arrival at the emergency department, medical professionals immediately took over his care. The situation required surgical intervention. Samini Liu was taken into an operating theater where surgeons meticulously worked to repair the extensive tissue damage and, crucially, to extract the deformed lead bullet from his left foot. The successful retrieval of the .22 caliber bullet was not merely a medical necessity for the victim's recovery. It instantly transformed a piece of metal into a vital, irrefutable piece of forensic evidence. The extraction of that bullet marked the beginning of a profound shift in the narrative of this event. What began as a violent, localized dispute driven by smuggled weapons and a notorious crime family was about to evolve into something far larger. The local police department, armed with the physical evidence retrieved by the surgical team at the LBJ Tropical Medical Center, mobilized swiftly. They descended upon the hospital and the scene of the crime in Vaitogi, systematically interviewing the attending physicians and the shocked witnesses who had been present in the vicinity of the ambush. The statements gathered, combined with the forensic evidence of the extracted bullet, provided the authorities with the necessary foundation to move against the powerful Siamo family. The subsequent law enforcement operation culminated in the successful apprehension of the shooter. The perpetrator was stripped of his freedom and transported to the Tafuna Correctional Facility, the primary detention center situated on the island. The heavy iron doors of Tafuna closing behind the suspect should have signaled the straightforward conclusion of a violent crime, followed by a standard criminal trial. However, the arrest of this specific individual, under these specific circumstances, in this specific United States territory, was merely the spark that ignited a massive legal powder keg. The detention of the Siamo family member set into motion a complex machinery of legal maneuvering that would soon capture the attention of the entire territory. The incident in Vaitogi was destined to transcend the boundaries of a simple aggravated assault case. It was rapidly heading toward the highest judicial authority on the island, the High Court of American Samoa. The legal battles that were about to unfold would not merely focus on the trajectory of a .22 caliber bullet or the testimonies of the witnesses. Instead, the defense would challenge the very foundations of the territorial justice system. The case would force an unprecedented examination of the constitutional civil rights afforded to a suspect residing within an unincorporated overseas territory of the United States. Furthermore, it would place the exact procedural methods used by the island's government to authorize and execute arrest warrants under a microscopic, highly critical legal scrutiny. The blood spilled on the coral-lined shores of Vaitogi was about to force a monumental constitutional reckoning, permanently altering the legal landscape of American Samoa. The extraction of the .22 caliber bullet from the shattered foot of Samini Liu within the sterile confines of the LBJ Tropical Medical Center marked a critical juncture in the trajectory of the investigation. In the immediate aftermath of the surgical procedure, the physical reality of the violence was transformed into tangible, unyielding forensic evidence. The lead projectile, deformed by its violent impact with human bone and tissue, was carefully preserved by the attending surgical staff. This small, misshapen piece of metal ceased to be merely the instrument of a brutal ambush and became the foundational element of a complex legal puzzle. The chain of custody began the moment the bullet was placed into an evidence container, bridging the gap between the medical effort to save a life and the law enforcement imperative to secure justice. The local police department, recognizing the volatile nature of the crime and the dangerous reputation of the family involved, moved with calculated urgency. Detectives arrived at the medical facility while the night was still dark, their presence introducing a stark, authoritative reality into the quiet hum of the hospital corridors. They required detailed, clinical accounts of the injuries sustained, seeking to corroborate the physical damage with the anticipated sequence of events. The interviews conducted with the medical professionals at the LBJ Tropical Medical Center were systematic and precise. Investigators documented the exact trajectory of the bullet, the extent of the trauma inflicted upon the victim, and the specific characteristics of the wound channel. This medical testimony was crucial, as it provided an objective, scientifically undeniable baseline for the investigation. The doctors detailed how the .22 caliber round, despite its relatively small size, possessed enough kinetic energy to cause profound structural damage upon impact, validating the lethal intent behind the ambush. Armed with this initial layer of clinical evidence, the investigative focus shifted back to the coastal village of Vaitogi. The transition from the brightly lit, controlled environment of the hospital to the shadowy, whispering reality of the village required a delicate and sophisticated approach by the law enforcement officers. They were not simply walking into a crime scene. They were stepping into a tight-knit community paralyzed by an invisible but suffocating blanket of fear. Returning to the rugged shoreline of Vaitogi, the investigators faced their most formidable obstacle, which was not a lack of physical clues, but the profound psychological barrier erected by the local residents. The villagers had heard the sharp crack of the gunshot echoing over the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the ancient coral reefs. They had witnessed the immediate, chaotic aftermath of the ambush. However, possessing knowledge of the crime and possessing the courage to articulate that knowledge to the authorities were two entirely different matters. The shadow of the Siamo criminal syndicate loomed large over the village. This family had systematically built a reputation rooted in intimidation, utilizing the influx of illegal firearms to enforce their will and silence opposition. For a villager to step forward and provide a sworn statement against a member of the Siamo family was to invite severe, potentially lethal, retaliation. The detectives understood this unspoken dynamic intimately. They knew that traditional methods of interrogation would be ineffective against such deeply ingrained communal terror. To overcome this pervasive wall of silence, the police had to employ a strategy of careful reassurance and patient persuasion. They moved through the village discreetly, seeking out individuals who might have observed the perpetrator lurking in the shadows prior to the attack or fleeing the scene after the trigger was pulled. The process of gathering witness testimonies was agonizingly slow, requiring the officers to navigate complex networks of tribal loyalty and primal self-preservation. Slowly, however, the overwhelming desire for peace and the shock of the brazen violence perpetrated against Samini Lu began to outweigh the paralyzing fear of the syndicate. Reluctant witnesses, speaking in hushed tones and demanding assurances of protection, began to provide fragmented accounts of the night. When pieced together, these individual observations formed a cohesive and damning narrative that aligned perfectly with the physical evidence retrieved from the victim and the medical reports generated at the hospital. The witnesses placed the specific member of the Siamo family at the scene, confirming the premeditated nature of the ambush and the cold, calculated execution of the assault. With the medical documentation secured and the corroborating eyewitness testimonies officially recorded, the police department possessed the necessary probable cause to take decisive action. The investigation transitioned from the phase of evidence gathering to the highly regulated administrative process of securing an arrest warrant. This procedural step, seemingly routine in standard law enforcement operations, would later become the central battleground of the entire case. The detectives compiled their findings, detailing the timeline of the ambush, the forensic recovery of the .22 caliber bullet, the extent of Samini Lu's injuries, and the sworn statements linking the suspect to the crime. This comprehensive affidavit was submitted to the local judicial authorities for review and approval. The objective was to obtain legal authorization to strip the suspect of his liberty and bring him into the custody of the state. Upon receiving the official endorsement from the magistrate, the police mobilized a specialized apprehension team. They knew that arresting a known figure within a powerful criminal organization required overwhelming force and absolute operational security to prevent escape or violent resistance. The execution of the arrest warrant was conducted with swift, uncompromising efficiency. The suspect, confident in the protective shield of his family's notorious reputation, was taken into custody by the territorial police force. The apprehension sent a powerful, undeniable message throughout the village of Vaitogi and the broader island community. It demonstrated that the local authorities were willing to confront the rising tide of syndicate violence and that the illegal firepower smuggled through the commercial fishing fleets would not grant the perpetrators absolute immunity. Following standard operating procedures, The restrained suspect was transported across the island to the Tafuna Correctional Facility. The journey to the prison marked a physical separation of the suspect from his network of influence. The Tafuna Correctional Facility stands as a stark, unforgiving environment, a place of concrete and steel designed to hold those accused of violating the laws of the territory. As the heavy doors of the detention center locked into place, securing the Siamo family member within his cell, the law enforcement personnel might have reasonably believed that the most difficult phase of their job was complete. They had successfully investigated a violent crime, identified the perpetrator, and executed a lawful arrest without further loss of life. However, the incarceration of the suspect at the Tafuna Correctional Facility was merely the preamble to a much larger, far more complex confrontation. The criminal syndicate, possessing significant resources and a vested interest in protecting their own, quickly mobilized a formidable legal defense team. These attorneys did not focus their initial efforts on challenging the physical evidence or the credibility of the terrified witnesses from Beitogi. Instead, they adopted a highly sophisticated and deeply intellectual legal strategy. They bypassed the immediate facts of the shooting and aimed their arguments directly at the systemic, structural foundations of the investigation itself. The defense attorneys recognized that the unique political and geographic status of American Samoa offered a rare and potent avenue for legal exploitation. As an unincorporated territory of the United States, the island operates under a complex, sometimes ambiguous intersection of local customary law and federal constitutional mandates. The defense strategy hinged on exploiting this ambiguity, transforming a straightforward case of aggravated assault into a profound constitutional crisis. The legal battlefield was subsequently relocated to the highest judicial authority within the territory, the High Court of American Samoa. The atmosphere within the courtroom was heavy with anticipation, as the proceedings held implications that extended far beyond the fate of the single defendant sitting at the defense table. The defense counsel initiated a vigorous, unprecedented challenge regarding the fundamental civil rights of their client. They argued that despite residing in an unincorporated overseas territory, the suspect was still entitled to the fundamental protections against unreasonable searches and seizures, protections inherently linked to the strict, mainland interpretations of constitutional law. The core of their argument focused relentlessly on the specific procedural mechanisms utilized by the local government to approve and issue the arrest warrant. They contended that the administrative process followed by the territorial police and the local magistrate was fatally flawed, arguing that it failed to meet the rigorous, constitutionally mandated standards required to legally deprive a citizen of their liberty. The legal arguments presented before the High Court were dense, academic, and fiercely contested. The defense meticulously dissected the timeline of the warrant application, questioning the jurisdictional authority of the official who signed the document and challenging the specific legal statutes that govern the territory's criminal procedure. They posited that if the procedural approval of the arrest warrant was found to be unconstitutional, then the arrest itself was entirely illegal. This legal doctrine, often referred to as the fruit of the poisonous tree, dictates that any evidence obtained as a direct result of an unlawful arrest could potentially be suppressed, rendering the prosecution's case effectively powerless. The prosecutors, representing the people of the territory, vehemently opposed this interpretation. They argued that the local territorial laws governing arrest procedures were valid, constitutionally sound within the context of an unincorporated territory, and strictly adhered to by the investigating officers. They emphasized the overwhelming physical evidence, the victim's suffering, and the paramount need to maintain public safety against the violent incursions of organized criminal families. The High Court of American Samoa was thus forced to grapple with questions of profound legal gravity. The justices were tasked with balancing the urgent necessity of combating the violent, gun-fueled crime threatening the peace of villages like Beitogi against the absolute, non-negotiable requirement to uphold the civil rights of the accused, regardless of their alleged affiliations. The debate centered on whether the local government possessed the legal autonomy to define its own warrant procedures or if it was strictly bound by the rigid, evolving standards established by mainland federal courts. Every hour spent dissecting the legal arguments in the courtroom seemed to distance the proceedings from the visceral reality of the crime. The terrified villagers, the shattered foot of Samini Liu, and the cold metal of the smuggled .22 caliber handgun were temporarily overshadowed by intense debates regarding procedural due process, territorial jurisdiction, and the philosophical nature of civil liberties in a remote oceanic territory. The outcome of this high-stakes legal maneuvering remained uncertain, leaving the island community suspended in a state of anxious apprehension, waiting to see if the complex architecture of the law would provide a shield for the guilty or a sword for the innocent. The high-ceiling chamber of the High Court of American Samoa felt a world away from the humid, salt-sprayed nights of Etogi, yet the air within it was thick with the same lingering tension that had permeated the village since the shooting. The proceedings had transitioned from the visceral, immediate reality of a crime scene to the cold, analytical environment of jurisprudence, where the fate of the accused was no longer dictated solely by the evidence of the bullet, but by the interpretation of constitutional boundaries. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution presented a narrative of urgent public necessity. They meticulously reconstructed the timeline of the investigation, emphasizing the cooperation of the medical staff at the LBJ Tropical Medical Center and the bravery of the local witnesses who had risked everything to provide testimony. Their legal strategy was designed to ground the court's focus on the absolute clarity of the physical evidence and the direct, undeniable harm inflicted upon Samini Liu. They argued that the procedures utilized to secure the warrant were not merely local formalities, but were robust, functional exercises of law enforcement authority specifically designed to preserve the peace in a territory often vulnerable to external criminal influences. The prosecution pointed out that the smuggling of illegal firearms via commercial fishing vessels had created an environment of lawlessness that mandated a firm, decisive state response. To allow the defense's procedural challenges to invalidate the arrest, they argued, would be to grant a dangerous degree of impunity to organized crime families who exploited the unique status of the territory to evade the reach of justice. Every mention of the .22 caliber bullet by the prosecutors was intended to remind the presiding justices of the physical reality, the trauma, the surgery, and the cold-blooded intent that had shattered the silence of a quiet village evening. Opposite them, the defense counsel projected an image of unwavering, intellectual defiance. They were not defending the act of violence itself, but rather the constitutional integrity of the judicial process. Their arguments were intricate, layered, and deeply skeptical of the state's exercise of power. They dissected the affidavit that had served as the basis for the arrest warrant with surgical precision, questioning the legal authority of the magistrate who had signed it and challenging the sufficiency of the evidence presented at that initial stage. They posited that in an unincorporated territory, the constitutional protections against arbitrary detention could not be diminished or compromised by local administrative shortcuts. The defense argued that if the law were allowed to bend to accommodate the pressures of local criminal unrest, the fundamental rights of every citizen would be eroded. They scrutinized the chain of command within the police department and demanded a detailed accounting of how the information was gathered, verified, and transmitted to the judicial authorities. They framed the arrest not as a triumph of justice, but as a potential overreach by a government eager to appease public outcry at the expense of individual liberty. The courtroom became a theater of semantics and legal theory, where the simple, brutal act of pulling a trigger was analyzed through the lens of constitutional precedent and jurisdictional limitation. As the arguments deepened, the conflict centered on the definition of due process within the unique legal framework of American Samoa. The justices listened with a practiced, stoic intensity, tasked with the monumental burden of balancing the immediate need to protect the community from the Siamo Syndicate against the long-term imperative of upholding the rule of law. The testimony regarding the arrest was put under a microscope. The police officers involved were called to the stand to recount their actions, their confidence tested under the relentless cross-examination of the defense attorneys. Every detail, from the hour of the application for the warrant to the exact wording of the statements provided by the witnesses in Beitogi, was challenged. The defense sought to expose any inconsistency, any deviation from established procedure, and any potential weakness that could be leveraged to argue that the arrest warrant had been issued without a sufficient foundation of probable cause. For those watching from the public gallery, many of whom were residents of Etogi, The disconnect between the technical jargon of the courtroom and the lived experience of the attack was jarring. To them, the perpetrator had been seen, the weapon had been recovered, and the victim had been left bleeding. The legal gymnastics being performed by the defense felt like an insult to the reality of their suffering and the fear that still gripped their community. The prosecution struggled to maintain the court's focus on the substantive evidence, constantly working to steer the discourse back to the facts of the crime. They emphasized the credibility of the witnesses and the forensic certainty of the ballistic findings, arguing that the procedural minutiae raised by the defense were distractions intended to obstruct the path toward a verdict. They articulated the reality of life on the islands, where the proximity to international maritime routes and the influx of illicit contraband presented unique challenges for law enforcement that the mainland legal framework did not always fully account for. The tension in the room remained high, a reflection of the stakes involved. A decision in favor of the defense would not only result in the potential release of a member of the Siamo family, but it would also set a legal precedent that could handicap the prosecution of similar crimes in the future, effectively creating a sanctuary for those who used illegal weapons to settle scores. A decision in favor of the prosecution would reinforce the authority of the state and provide a degree of closure to the victim, but it would also require the court to affirm that the existing territorial procedures were robust enough to pass rigorous constitutional scrutiny. The discourse also turned towards the role of the Siamo family in the social structure of the territory. While the defense tried to isolate the case to the technicalities of the arrest, the prosecution introduced the broader context of the intimidation and criminal influence that the syndicate exercised. They argued that the context of the crime, the choice of a .22 caliber handgun, the ambush, and the target, demonstrated a clear, calculated effort to assert dominance through violence. The defense pushed back, insisting that the character and reputation of the defendant's family were irrelevant to the question of whether his specific arrest had been constitutional. They maintained that the law was blind to the reputation of the accused, and that the state had a duty to prove its case against the individual based only on the evidence at hand and the legality of the processes employed. The debate was a microcosm of the wider tension between the desire for order and safety in a traditional society and the commitment to the formal, often cumbersome protections of a modern legal system. The justices held the power to resolve this tension, their eventual ruling poised to define the balance between these competing imperatives for years to come. Throughout these intense sessions, the shadow of Samini Lu loomed over the proceedings. Although his recovery continued, the psychological toll of the ordeal, coupled with the uncertainty of the legal outcome, remained a source of significant distress. The legal team representing the victims worked to ensure that his voice, although mediated through the official statements and medical records, remained central to the court's considerations. They advocated for the recognition of the victims' rights and the necessity of accountability in a community that was increasingly weary of the violence inflicted by the illicit arms trade. The courtroom was more than just an arena for legal theory. It was the final stage in a journey that had begun on a dark path in Beitogi, and the outcome would dictate whether the community could regain a sense of security and trust in their justice system. The deliberation period that followed the conclusion of the arguments felt interminable. The island held its breath, the atmosphere thick with the anticipation of a decision that would ripple through every village and touch every household, marking a definitive moment in the history of American Samoa's struggle against the encroachment of organized, weaponized crime. The justices, weighing the constitutional claims against the practical necessities of territorial security, retreated to finalize a judgment that would determine not only the future of the individual defendant, but the integrity of the law itself within this isolated and beautiful corner of the world. Each day that passed without a verdict increased the feeling of uncertainty, reflecting the profound stakes of a case that had transformed from a local incident into a constitutional landmark, forcing the territory to confront its own vulnerabilities and its commitment to the very principles that governed its relationship with the broader United States. The final decision, whatever it might be, was certain to be remembered as a pivot point in the evolution of the island's judicial history, a testament to the enduring, often difficult task of reconciling tradition with the harsh, modern realities of crime and punishment. The tension that had suffocated the High Court of American Samoa during the intense legal battles finally began to coalesce into a sense of looming finality as the deliberative phase reached its culmination. Outside the courtroom walls, the village of Veitogi remained a place of quiet, yet profound, observation. For the residents who lived within the sound of the rhythmic Pacific swells, the legal proceedings were not merely an abstract exercise in constitutional theory. They were the final act of a long-standing struggle against the encroachment of organized violence. The anticipation of the court's decision weighed heavily on the community, mirroring the period of uncertainty that followed the initial ambush on that dark July evening. The forensic reality of the case, the path of the .22 caliber bullet, the trauma documented by the surgeons at the LBJ Tropical Medical Center, and the evidence of the premeditated ambush seemed to collide with the complex, intellectualized defense strategies that had dominated the courtroom. The prosecutors had been unrelenting in their efforts to bridge the gap between these disparate elements, consistently steering the discourse toward the necessity of institutional accountability and the protection of the public from the pervasive influence of the Sialmo Syndicate. The investigation, as it had unfolded over the preceding months, was a testament to the perseverance of the local law enforcement officers. They had operated under the constant pressure of a community watching, waiting, and fearful of the potential for retaliation. The detectives who had initially processed the crime scene, collected the ballistic evidence, and tracked down the reluctant witnesses had faced an uphill battle from the very start. Every step of their investigation had been meticulously logged, yet they were now confronted with a reality where their professional due diligence was being treated as a potential liability. This dissonance between the hard work of the investigators and the aggressive challenge posed by the defense counsel forced the court to conduct a thorough and exhausting review of the internal procedures of the territorial justice system. The case file had become a massive, intricate tapestry of testimonies, medical reports, and procedural records, all of which now stood before the justices as the definitive record of the incident. The scrutiny applied to the warrant application process, in particular, had demanded a level of detail that pushed the boundaries of standard judicial review. As the court moved toward its final determination, the focus narrowed significantly, concentrating on the balance between the individual rights of the defendant and the collective security of the territory. The defense had effectively argued that the integrity of the judicial process required an absolute adherence to constitutional standards, suggesting that any deviation, no matter how minor or understandable given the unique geographical challenges of American Samoa, was sufficient to undermine the legitimacy of the entire operation. This argument resonated with a certain legal purism, one that viewed the law as a set of static, unyielding principles. However, the prosecution countered with a vision of the law that was more functional, one that considered the specific context of an unincorporated overseas territory. They emphasized that the administration of justice in such a location required a pragmatic approach, capable of adapting to the realities of a remote environment where resources could be limited and the pressures of criminal syndicates were particularly acute. This was the fundamental collision of philosophies that the justices were tasked with resolving. Behind the scenes, the investigators continued to maintain their vigilance. The knowledge that the suspect was currently held in the Tafuna Correctional Facility, awaiting the final outcome, served as a temporary, stabilizing force for the village. The prison, a structure of stark concrete and strictly controlled access, represented the boundary between the lawlessness of the criminal element and the rule of law. It was a place where the promises of the courtroom were held in a state of suspended animation. The investigators knew that regardless of the court's decision, their work had fundamentally changed the social landscape of Veitogi. By successfully linking the Sialmo family member to the crime and ensuring his detention, they had disrupted the narrative of impunity that the syndicate had cultivated for years. The ripple effects of this intervention were felt in the quiet interactions among villagers who were slowly beginning to reclaim their sense of agency, bolstered by the knowledge that the authorities had, at the very least, demonstrated a willingness to confront those who sought to use violence to control their lives. The final phase of the court's deliberation involved a comprehensive assessment of the procedural history of the warrant. The justices examined the jurisdictional claims, the documentation of probable cause, and the chain of custody for the key evidence, the bullet itself. This was the moment where the abstract arguments gave way to the practicalities of the case. The defense had consistently attempted to cast doubt on the procedural timeline, highlighting any potential discrepancy in the filing and approval of the documents. Their strategy was to create a cloud of uncertainty, a reasonable doubt that could permeate the entire case. The prosecution, conversely, had spent hours ensuring that the evidentiary trail was airtight, relying on the testimonies of the medical professionals who had handled the bullet and the law enforcement officers who had secured the arrest. This evidentiary foundation was the bedrock upon which the state's case rested, and the justices were tasked with determining whether that foundation could withstand the intense, systemic pressure applied by the defense. As the proceedings drew to a close, the atmosphere in the courtroom transformed from one of heated conflict to one of heavy, reflective solemnity. The arguments had been exhausted, the records had been reviewed, and the potential outcomes had been debated in exhaustive detail. The community, the victim, and the legal professionals involved were all poised for a verdict that would echo throughout the territory. For Samini Liu, the physical journey from the emergency room to the court had been long and marked by profound suffering. His recovery had been a slow, painstaking process, and the ongoing legal uncertainty had undoubtedly complicated his efforts to heal and move forward. His presence in the narrative, though often mediated through the legal apparatus, remained the moral center of the case. The shooting had not just been a crime against an individual, it had been an assault on the community, a violation of the traditional peace that defined the identity of the village of Etogi. The court's judgment would be an affirmation of whether that peace was protected by law or vulnerable to the whims of those with enough power to arm themselves against their neighbors. The process of reaching a verdict was not merely a matter of applying statutes, it was an act of shaping the future of the territory's judicial identity. The justices were acutely aware that their decision would set a precedent, potentially influencing how future criminal investigations were conducted and how the courts would evaluate the constitutional claims of defendants in similar, highly publicized cases. They recognized that the outcome would be interpreted as either a triumph of due process or a victory for public safety, and they understood the weight of that responsibility. The silence of the deliberation period was a reflection of the profound gravity of the task. It was a pause in time, a moment where the conflicting interests of liberty, security, tradition, and law converged in a single point of decision. The village of Etogi, the Tafuna Correctional Facility, and the halls of the High Court were all connected by this singular, unfolding event, a case that had transcended its own details to become a defining moment in the history of American Samoa. As the final discussions concluded within the chambers, the sense of inevitability grew. The work of the investigators, the courage of the witnesses, and the dedication of the legal teams were about to be weighed against the highest standards of the law. The culmination of this long, arduous process was nearing, and with it, the resolution of the tension that had gripped the community for so long. The case, having begun with the report of a shooting in the dark and the medical response to a bullet wound, had reached its ultimate realization in the form of a judicial ruling. Whatever the decision would be, it was destined to be a transformative moment for the territory, a chapter in its history that would be studied and remembered as a profound, complex, and vital part of its ongoing story. The anticipation of the final judgment was not merely a reaction to the specific facts of the crime, but a collective realization that the outcome would redefine the relationship between the people, the law, and the unique challenges of their isolated island home. The stage was set, the arguments were finished, and the court was prepared to deliver its definitive, lasting word. The culmination of the legal proceedings in the High Court of American Samoa arrived with a stark, resonant finality that pierced the months of speculative tension. When the justices finally delivered their verdict, the courtroom fell into a silence, so profound that it seemed to absorb the very air itself. The decision was not merely a ruling on the guilt or innocence of the individual member of the Siamo family. It was a comprehensive judicial statement on the intersection of territorial autonomy and the overarching constitutional mandates of the United States. The court meticulously addressed the defense's prolonged and highly technical challenges regarding the warrant procedures. In a nuanced and authoritative judgment, The justices concluded that while the procedures employed by the territorial authorities were not entirely flawless in their administrative execution, they did not reach the threshold of constitutional violation that would necessitate the suppression of evidence or the dismissal of the charges. The court affirmed that the exigencies of law enforcement within a remote, unincorporated territory necessitated a degree of flexibility that, while still bound by the spirit of the Constitution, acknowledged the practical realities of maintaining order against organized criminal syndicates. This ruling was a definitive rejection of the notion that technical procedural irregularities could be exploited to grant legal immunity to those who utilized violence as an instrument of control. By validating the arrest warrant, the court effectively cleared the path for the prosecution to proceed with the core charges against the defendant. The verdict served as a vital affirmation of the law enforcement efforts that had commenced with the frantic transport of the injured Samini Liu to the LBJ Tropical Medical Center and concluded with the forensic precision of the investigation that followed. The judgment provided a clear signal to the community of Vaitogi and the broader population of American Samoa that the rule of law was not merely a passive concept but an active, enforceable mandate that would not yield to the intimidation tactics of notorious crime families. The weight of the Siamo family's influence, which had long been felt as an invisible, suffocating presence in the village, was significantly diminished by the judicial stamp of authority. The defendant, who had remained in the Tafuna Correctional Facility throughout the duration of the trial, now faced the inevitable progression toward sentencing. The transition from the courtroom back to the realities of the penal system was swift, and the finality of the decision brought a sense of closure to the most volatile phase of the case. The sentencing hearing, which took place in the weeks following the verdict, was a somber reflection of the damage wrought by the initial act of violence. The prosecution presented evidence of the lasting physical and psychological impact of the injury on Samini Liu, reinforcing the gravity of the assault. The use of a .22 caliber handgun, now permanently established as the weapon of choice for criminal elements operating via the island's maritime networks, became a focal point of the sentencing discourse. The court emphasized that the deliberate nature of the ambush, coupled with the intent to harm and the systemic disruption caused to the peace of the village, demanded a sentence that reflected the seriousness of the crime. The defense, despite the setback of the verdict, sought leniency for their client, but the court remained steadfast in its assessment. The sentencing of the perpetrator to a significant term of incarceration within the territorial system was the final, tangible result of the arduous investigation and the complex legal battles that had defined the case. It was a clear, unequivocal statement that the era of impunity for such brazen acts of violence was facing a powerful and effective challenge. Following the sentencing, the atmosphere in the territory began to undergo a subtle but perceptible shift. The immediate threat posed by the specific member of the Siamo family had been neutralized, and the legal precedent set by the High Court provided a clear roadmap for future prosecutions involving similar procedural challenges. The investigation and subsequent trial had forced the various branches of the territorial government to collaborate with a newfound intensity, tightening the coordination between the judiciary, the police, and the medical experts who served as the primary witnesses to the crime. This synergy was not just a response to a single incident, it was an investment in the long-term security of the island. The lessons learned from the case of the Vaitogi shooting were integrated into the training and operational protocols of the law enforcement agencies, ensuring that future warrant applications and investigative procedures would be carried out with even greater meticulousness. The vulnerability that had been exposed by the initial breach of the village's peace was being systematically addressed, creating a more robust framework for the protection of all residents. For the community of Vaitogi, the conclusion of the trial offered a path toward reconciliation and the restoration of a more traditional order. The fear that had once prevented individuals from speaking out had been tempered by the reality that justice could, and would, be served. The village, with its pristine coral reefs and its deep connection to the history of the island, slowly began to feel like a sanctuary once again. While the memory of the shooting would undoubtedly remain a part of the local consciousness, it was no longer the sole defining feature of their daily lives. The victim, Samini Liu, having successfully undergone his surgical recovery and seen his case through to its final resolution, began the difficult process of returning to his life. The acknowledgement of his suffering by the court and the ultimate conviction of his assailant provided a crucial element of the closure that was necessary for him to move past the trauma. His perseverance throughout the long months of medical treatment and legal uncertainty stood as a quiet, stoic testament to the resilience of the people of American Samoa. The legacy of this case, however, extended far beyond the immediate participants. The legal battles that had occupied the High Court became a significant part of the territory's jurisprudence, frequently cited in discussions regarding the nature of due process in unincorporated areas. The case had served as an unintentional, yet essential, laboratory for testing the limits and applications of constitutional law in a remote, island-based jurisdiction. It had highlighted the challenges of balancing external legal standards with local cultural contexts, and it had demonstrated the necessity of institutional integrity in the face of pressures that could otherwise erode the foundational values of the society. The judicial record of the case would remain a permanent reference point for attorneys, judges, and policymakers, a reminder of the intricate balance required to maintain the rule of law in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. The decision of the High Court had not only resolved a criminal dispute, but had helped to solidify the legal architecture of the territory for the future, providing a more stable foundation for the administration of justice. As the months turned into years, the events of July 1989 in Beitogi were increasingly viewed as a historical marker, a point in time when the community had collectively confronted the reality of modern, imported violence, and successfully utilized their own judicial system to hold the perpetrators accountable. The case had transformed from a local tragedy into a foundational element of the territory's modern history, illustrating the capacity of a small, traditional community to adapt to the changing realities of the modern world without sacrificing their commitment to justice and public peace. The story of the .22 caliber handgun, the ambush at the Coraline shore, the surgery at the medical center, and the precedent-setting rulings of the court became an essential part of the narrative of American Samoa. It was a story of survival, of institutional resolve, and of the enduring, often difficult, process of reconciling the ancient, peaceful traditions of the island with the harsh, modern realities of crime and punishment. The finality of the court's judgment marked the end of the legal proceedings, but it was also the beginning of a period of renewed stability as the community emerged from the shadow of the Siamo family, tempered and strengthened by the experience of a hard-won victory for the rule of law. The resolution of the case stands as an enduring example of how a society, when tested by the most challenging of circumstances, can find the resolve to uphold its principles and protect the tranquility of its people, even in the face of those who would seek to undermine it with violence and fear, leaving a legacy of resilience that continues to resonate within the quiet, beautiful landscape of Beitogi and beyond. The long, intricate journey from the shadowed shores of Beitogi to the hallowed, final deliberation of the High Court of American Samoa serves as a poignant, historical reflection on the fragility of peace in an isolated, traditional society. As the dust settled on the legal battles and the echo of the sentencing faded into the rhythmic, unchanging sound of the Pacific waves against the coral reefs, the broader implications of the case began to resonate far beyond the confines of the Tafuna Correctional Facility. The story of Samini Liu and his struggle against the organized violence of the Siamo family is not merely a chronicle of crime and punishment. It is a profound illustration of the resilience of a community navigating the turbulent intersection of ancient customs and modern, imported dangers. The case became an indelible mark on the identity of the territory, a stark reminder that even in the most serene corners of the world, the influence of illegal, external networks can pose a fundamental threat to the domestic tranquility and the rule of law. It highlighted the inescapable reality that no geography, however remote, is entirely immune to the systemic issues that plague modern societies, particularly the proliferation of illicit weaponry smuggled through the global maritime trade. The legacy of the Beitogi incident is, perhaps above all else, one of institutional courage and procedural integrity. The decision by the local authorities to confront a notorious crime family, despite the pervasive climate of fear, was a testament to the dedication of those who swore an oath to protect the citizenry. When the investigators secured the bullet from the LBJ Tropical Medical Center and meticulously documented the forensic evidence, they were engaging in an act of defiance against the shadow rule that the Siamo Syndicate had sought to impose upon the village. This investigative persistence was matched by the judiciary, which, in the face of intense, highly intellectualized challenges, upheld the fundamental principles of due process without allowing the legal system to be weaponized by those who sought to undermine its validity. The court's ability to navigate the complex, often ambiguous jurisdictional issues surrounding an unincorporated overseas territory, while ensuring that the victim's rights and the public's safety were prioritized, remains a benchmark for the development of the island's legal framework. It demonstrated that the rule of law could be adapted to unique cultural and geographical contexts without compromising the essential guarantees of liberty and justice that define the governing principles of the United States. However, the reflection on this case must also encompass the profound human cost that necessitated such a complex legal reckoning. Samini Lu's experience serves as a stark, human reminder of the devastation wrought by the impulsive, premeditated use of violence. His survival, his harrowing surgical intervention, and the long, taxing recovery period represent the quiet, often overlooked struggle of the victim in the face of criminal ambition. The community of Vaitogi, having been forced to confront the violent encroachment of the Siamo Syndicate, emerged from the crisis as a more unified, vigilant collective. The experience taught the residents that their collective voice, when backed by the formal processes of the state, could successfully disrupt the impunity of those who believe themselves untouchable. The village's path toward healing was intrinsically linked to the resolution of the legal case. As the perpetrator was removed from the community and placed behind bars, the suffocating atmosphere of intimidation began to dissipate, allowing the natural, peaceful rhythm of life to slowly reassert itself. The analytical perspective of this case also forces us to consider the broader socio-political challenges inherent in maintaining security within an unincorporated territory like American Samoa. The porosity of the ports and the ease with which illegal arms could be integrated into local disputes represent an ongoing, systemic challenge that the government must continue to address. The lessons derived from the Vaitogi case, the necessity of enhanced interagency cooperation, the importance of maintaining rigorous evidentiary standards, and the requirement for a judicial system capable of navigating unique constitutional questions have become an essential part of the territory's administrative legacy. By documenting and analyzing the trajectory of this specific crime, from the initial ambush to the final sentencing, we gain a deeper understanding of how institutional systems are pressured and eventually tempered by extreme events. It is a process of growth and refinement, where the system is constantly tested against the realities of contemporary crime, leading to the development of stronger, more effective mechanisms for the protection of society. Furthermore, the philosophical essence of the case lies in the delicate balance between tradition and modernization. The people of American Samoa, with their deep-seated respect for tribal hierarchies and community cohesion, often face the difficult task of reconciling these ancient values with the formal, often individualistic requirements of a constitutional legal system. The Vaitogi shooting acted as a catalyst for this reconciliation, forcing the community to lean into the protections offered by the rule of law while maintaining their unique cultural identity. It was a demonstration of how a traditional society can utilize the tools of a modern justice system to protect its own peace, proving that the commitment to justice is not a foreign imposition, but a powerful, universal value that can be harmoniously integrated into the fabric of daily life. The case stands as a testament to the enduring, often difficult task of maintaining order in a world that is increasingly interconnected, yet defined by localized and distinct social structures. As we look back at the events of July 1989, we're struck by the timeless quality of the lessons learned. The narrative of the .22 caliber handgun and its violent deployment serves as a chilling, yet necessary, reminder of the dangers of allowing criminal influence to fester in the shadows of a community. It is a story that, while specific to a small village in the South Pacific, resonates with anyone who understands the vital importance of holding those in power, or those who would seize power through violence, accountable. The resolution of the case did not just bring an end to a local conflict, it provided a sense of continuity and security for future generations. The memory of the Vaitogi incident is now part of the collective history of the island, a story handed down to emphasize the necessity of vigilance and the critical importance of a fair, transparent, and courageous justice system. Ultimately, the case of the Vaitogi shooting in 1989 remains a defining chapter in the history of American Samoa, one that illustrates the capacity for institutional and communal endurance. It shows us that while the mechanisms of law and the administration of justice can be complex and at times cumbersome, they remain the most potent defenses against the encroachment of chaos and arbitrary power. The story concludes not with the finality of the court's decree, but with the ongoing resilience of a people who, having been tested by the most challenging of circumstances, chose the path of law, order, and collective peace. The quiet village of Vaitogi, with its beautiful coral reefs and enduring traditions, continues to thrive, a testament to the idea that no matter the size or isolation of a community, the pursuit of justice is a fundamental, transformative endeavor that shapes the future and protects the essential dignity of every individual. The reflection upon this case provides a guiding light, reminding us that through the strength of community, the courage of investigative work, and the steadfastness of the judiciary, even the most profound threats to our peace can be navigated, resolved, and overcome, ensuring that the serenity of our homes and the integrity of our lives are preserved for all time. The legacy of Samini Liu and the community's fight for justice is an enduring narrative of strength, a beacon of hope in the quiet, expansive beauty of the South Pacific, and a powerful lesson in the necessity of standing against violence to protect the most cherished values of a civilization. The long, complex journey of the Vaitogi case, which has been meticulously documented from the initial, violent ambush to the final, precedent-setting judicial ruling, leaves behind a legacy that continues to influence the legal and social evolution of American Samoa. As we move past the immediate aftermath and the cooling of the societal tensions that once gripped the village, it is essential to reflect on the broader, systemic changes that have emerged from this singular, tragic event. The shooting, which occurred on that fateful July evening in 1989, acted as a powerful diagnostic tool, exposing the vulnerabilities within the territory's administrative and security infrastructures. It revealed with painful clarity how the influx of international maritime trade, while economically essential, simultaneously introduced a lethal, hidden element into the island's social fabric in the form of smuggled, illicit firearms. The recognition of this reality, driven by the hard-won findings of the investigation, forced a recalibration of how the government approached port security and the monitoring of vessels that served as the primary conduits for these dangerous goods. This reactive policy shift, while late in coming, represented a crucial step in the territory's effort to regain control over its internal security and prevent the further normalization of weaponized violence within tribal conflicts. The judicial resolution of the case also serves as a perpetual reference for the High Court of American Samoa when confronted with the delicate task of applying constitutional standards to an unincorporated territory. The defense's sophisticated strategy, which sought to exploit the ambiguity of territorial jurisdiction, ultimately provided the court with the opportunity to refine its procedural standards. By creating a legal record that affirmed the validity of the government's arrest and investigation protocols, the case reinforced the authority of the judiciary to interpret federal constitutional protections in a manner that respects the unique cultural and administrative landscape of the Pacific Islands. This legal clarification has provided a more predictable and stable environment for both law enforcement and the accused, ensuring that future criminal proceedings are guided by a clearer understanding of the limits and obligations of state power. The case proved that the rule of law in American Samoa was not merely a derivative of mainland models, but a dynamic, resilient entity capable of adapting to local challenges while remaining tethered to the fundamental principles of human rights and due process. Furthermore, the personal story of Samini Liu has left an indelible mark on the community, serving as a quiet but powerful symbol of endurance. His decision to cooperate with the authorities, despite the significant personal risks involved, marked a turning point in the collective consciousness of Etogi. It challenged the prevailing, silent acceptance of the Siamo family's influence and encouraged a new spirit of communal accountability. In the years that followed, the memory of his ordeal became woven into the cultural narrative of the village, serving as a warning against the dangers of unchecked criminal ambition and a tribute to the necessity of courage in the face of intimidation. The restoration of peace in Veitogi was not an automatic process, but a conscious, collective effort by the residents to reaffirm their traditional values while embracing the protections afforded by the modern justice system. This synthesis of tradition and legality has become a hallmark of the village's identity, illustrating how a community can emerge from the shadows of violence to cultivate a more stable and transparent society. As we analyze the long-term impact of this case, we must also consider the evolution of the medical and forensic services in the territory. The successful retrieval and preservation of the bullet from Samini Lu's foot was not just a medical success. It was the essential link in the evidentiary chain that allowed the prosecution to build an irrefutable case. This success highlighted the importance of professional collaboration between trauma centers like the LBJ Tropical Medical Center and the law enforcement agencies. Since 1989, the protocols for forensic evidence collection, chain of custody management, and the coordination between medical professionals and investigators have been standardized and integrated, ensuring that the critical lessons learned from the Veitogi shooting are embedded in the standard operating procedures of the territory. This investment in the technical capacity of the state ensures that future victims are afforded the same level of investigative attention and that perpetrators find it increasingly difficult to evade justice through technicalities or the intimidation of potential witnesses. The philosophical implications of the case continue to be a subject of interest for those studying the intersection of tradition and modernity in Pacific Island territories. The conflict between the Siamo family's traditional claims to power and the formal, egalitarian demands of the constitutional legal system represents a fundamental tension that many such regions must navigate. The Veitogi case demonstrated that this tension, while fraught with potential for conflict, can also be a site of productive legal and social reform. By choosing to submit the conflict to the High Court, the territory avoided the descent into cycles of tribal retaliation that have historically decimated communities elsewhere. Instead, it used the legal process to resolve the dispute, effectively signaling the dominance of the rule of law over private, extra-legal vendettas. This transition from informal, custom-based justice to formal, state-sanctioned legal proceedings is a hallmark of a maturing society, and the Veitogi incident remains a primary case study of this transformation in the context of American Samoa. Looking forward, the case remains a vital component of the territory's pedagogical resources for legal professionals and community leaders alike. It is frequently discussed in educational seminars and policy discussions to illustrate the nuances of warrant execution, the importance of maintaining procedural transparency, and the necessity of victim support throughout the judicial process. By keeping the history of the case alive, the territory ensures that the costs of the 1989 shooting are not forgotten, and that the efforts of the individuals who risked their safety to achieve justice are honored. This collective memory acts as a protective buffer, a reminder of the vigilance required to maintain the peace and the commitment needed to uphold the values of a fair and equitable society. The case, therefore, is not merely a historical artifact. It is an active, ongoing reference point that continues to shape the contemporary legal and social practices of the territory, contributing to a culture of accountability that serves the interests of all residents. In conclusion, the saga of the 1989 Veitogi shooting is a testament to the enduring, often grueling nature of the fight for justice in a small, traditional community. It is a narrative of resilience, characterized by the refusal of a community to be defined by the violence inflicted upon it. The final, lasting legacy of this case is the solidification of a legal order that, while still subject to the complexities of its unique geopolitical position, remains committed to the protection of its citizens and the maintenance of the public peace. The story of Samini Lu and his journey toward resolution serves as a reminder that even in the face of deep-seated criminal power and the threat of imported violence, the resolve of a society to uphold the rule of law can prevail. It is a story that continues to resonate with the quiet strength of the village of Vaitogi, the professionalism of the LBJ Tropical Medical Center, and the authoritative wisdom of the High Court, forming an essential and enduring part of the history of American Samoa. The case continues to serve as an inspiration to those who recognize that the pursuit of justice is a constant, evolving responsibility, one that requires courage, institutional dedication, and a steadfast belief in the capacity of a community to thrive within the bounds of a shared, transparent legal framework, leaving behind a legacy of strength that will undoubtedly continue to influence the future of the territory for many years to come. The echoes of the Vaitogi incident, now decades removed from the initial, searing shock of the gunfire, continue to serve as a profound testament to the resilience of a small territory grappling with the complexities of the modern world. In the years that have followed, the story of the shooting has transitioned from a harrowing present-day crisis into an essential historical anchor for the people of American Samoa. It is a narrative that is frequently revisited not out of a desire to dwell on the tragedy, but because of the vital, foundational lessons it imparts to the subsequent generations who now navigate the same coastal paths that were once marked by the violence of the Siamo family. The case acts as a diagnostic lens through which the community views its own development, measuring the strength of its institutions, the evolution of its civil society, and the enduring nature of its commitment to the rule of law. Every element of the case, from the forensic retrieval of the .22 caliber bullet to the complex debates held within the High Court, has been assimilated into the public memory as a collective victory against the erosion of peace. The long-term impact on the community's social fabric is perhaps the most significant, if least quantifiable, outcome of the 1989 ordeal. The village of Vaitogi, which once lived under the stifling cloud of syndicate-imposed fear, has evolved into a place where the collective agency of the citizenry is treated with a renewed sense of respect. The residents have internalized the understanding that their safety is not merely the responsibility of distant officials, but is rooted in the shared refusal to tolerate the presence of illegal, imported weaponry within their midst. This grassroots vigilance is the most effective deterrent against the return of such organized threats. The story of Samini Liu, specifically, has been elevated to a position of quiet honor, not as a victim who is defined by his suffering, but as a catalyst who, through his decision to engage with the authorities, empowered his neighbors to reject the culture of silence that had previously shielded the perpetrators. His legacy is one of courage, illustrating that even in a society where tribal connections and traditional hierarchies exert powerful influences, the ultimate authority must reside in the fair, transparent, and equitable administration of justice for all. Furthermore, the legal architecture that was stress-tested by this case continues to serve as the bedrock for the territory's judicial operations. The precedents established during the appeals and the procedural reviews conducted by the High Court have provided a clear, reliable roadmap for legal practitioners. They have settled the once ambiguous questions surrounding the constitutional rights of those within the territory, providing a more stable and predictable environment for both the defense and the prosecution. This legal clarity is essential for a society that seeks to maintain its traditions while actively participating in the broader, globalized context of the United States. It has empowered the courts to act as a robust arbiter of conflicts, discouraging the use of private, extralegal methods of dispute resolution and reinforcing the status of the High Court as the final, trusted authority on matters of law and justice. The legacy of the Vaitogi case is thus embedded in every subsequent ruling and legal opinion that contributes to the ongoing evolution of the territorial justice system. The medical center, the LBJ Tropical Medical Center, has also undergone a silent, professional transformation that mirrors the lessons of the 1989 investigation. The facility is no longer just a provider of healthcare, it is an integrated partner in the territory's forensic and public safety infrastructure. The standard of care for trauma patients, specifically those arriving with injuries indicative of criminal violence, now includes rigorous, standardized forensic protocols that ensure the integrity of any subsequent legal process. This evolution reflects a broader awareness of how different sectors of the government, medical, police, and judicial, must work in seamless, coordinated fashion to protect the community. The 1989 experience taught the territory that a failure in one area, such as a botched chain of custody or an inadequately documented wound, can have catastrophic consequences for the entire judicial effort. By institutionalizing the lessons of the Vaitogi shooting, the territory has created a self-reinforcing system of public safety that is significantly more difficult for organized criminal elements to manipulate or evade. As we look at the current state of American Samoa in 2026, it is clear that the shadow of the Siamo family and the era of unchecked maritime smuggling have been significantly curtailed. While the territory continues to navigate the challenges inherent to its geography and its role as a regional hub for international trade, it does so with a level of sophistication and institutional maturity that was conspicuously absent in 1989. The proactive measures taken to enhance port security, the rigorous vetting of maritime traffic, and the increased cooperation between local and federal law enforcement agencies are all direct, though often unacknowledged, outcomes of the path carved by the Vaitogi case. The territory has learned that its vulnerability to external threats is best managed through a combination of local engagement, professional institutional capacity, and a steadfast adherence to the constitutional processes that provide the ultimate guarantee of individual liberty. The philosophy of justice that emerged from the case, a blend of pragmatic adaptation and principled commitment, has become a part of the territory's broader identity. It suggests that American Samoa does not need to abandon its traditional customs to embrace a modern, fair, and effective legal system. Instead, the two can exist in a mutually reinforcing harmony, where the wisdom of the village elders and the formal mechanisms of the High Court work toward the same, singular goal of communal stability. This synthesis is the true, lasting legacy of the 1989 shooting. It is a lesson in the power of institutional integrity to heal a community and to provide a durable foundation for the future. The story is no longer about the act of violence itself, but about the collective response to that violence, a response that was characterized by resilience, dedication, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of a just resolution. In conclusion, the Vaitogi case of 1989 stands as a definitive, landmark moment in the history of American Samoa, offering a blueprint for how a small, traditional community can effectively navigate the pressures of modern, imported crime. The story of the .22 caliber bullet and the subsequent constitutional battles has become a permanent feature of the territory's history, reminding each new generation of the fragile nature of peace and the constant vigilance required to maintain it. The case continues to inspire, to teach, and to provide a source of stability for a territory that, while small in size, has demonstrated an outsized capacity for institutional excellence and civic courage. As the Pacific waves continue to strike the ancient coral reefs of Vaitogi, they carry with them the memory of this history, a silent, rhythmic tribute to the enduring power of justice and the resilience of a people who have proven, time and time again, that their home remains a sanctuary of the rule of law, protected by the strength of their own convictions and the clarity of their shared purpose. The journey that began on that dark night in July of 1989 is a reminder that even in the face of the most profound adversity, the path toward a better, more secure future is always open to those who have the courage to walk it, anchored by the truth, defended by the law, and sustained by the unbreakable spirit of the community. The enduring legacy of the Vaitogi shooting, viewed from the vantage point of 2026, extends beyond the immediate resolution of the criminal case and the subsequent legal precedents that define the High Court's jurisprudence. It serves as a foundational narrative for the territory's ongoing engagement with the challenges of a globalized maritime economy, where the ease of movement across the vast Pacific brings both vital economic connections and the perennial threat of transnational illicit activity. The story of 1989 has become a core element of the pedagogical training provided to law enforcement officers and judicial staff in American Samoa, functioning as a quintessential case study in the necessity of investigative precision, the preservation of the chain of custody, and the vital importance of protecting the rights of victims while simultaneously pursuing the goals of public order and community safety. By embedding these lessons into the professional development of the territory's civil servants, the government has ensured that the memory of the past is actively utilized to strengthen the resilience of the present, creating a culture of law enforcement that is both ethically grounded and operationally proficient. The transformation of the socio-legal landscape in American Samoa since the events of July 1989 is reflected in the sophisticated, modern mechanisms now employed to monitor port entry points and manage the influx of international cargo. The government has transitioned from a reliance on reactive measures to a more proactive, integrated strategy that leverages improved surveillance technology and enhanced cross-departmental cooperation between customs, police, and regional security partners. This shift, which originated in the recognition of the dangers posed by the unchecked arrival of illegal arms, represents a maturation of the territory's governance. It is an acknowledgement that the protection of the village, the home, and the individual requires a comprehensive approach that reaches far beyond the boundaries of the island, accounting for the complex networks of maritime trade that define the territory's economic and social existence. The case of the .22 caliber handgun serves as the historical catalyst for this strategic evolution, a permanent reminder that the stability of the village is inextricably linked to the security of the ports. Within the community of Etogi, the passage of time has allowed for a process of historical reconciliation, where the memory of the shooting is no longer a source of active, daily anxiety, but a testament to the village's collective perseverance. The younger generations, who grew up hearing the accounts of the 1989 ordeal from their elders, view the incident as a defining moment in their history, an era when the community faced an existential threat to its traditional peace and successfully navigated the transition into a more structured, rule-of-law-based response. This generational transmission of history has fostered a deep sense of communal responsibility, where the residents are not merely passive participants in the legal system, but active guardians of their own peace. The village has re-established itself as a model of resilience, where the traditional values of the Polynesian culture are harmoniously balanced with a firm commitment to the formal, equitable principles of the constitutional justice system. The role of the High Court of American Samoa as the ultimate arbiter of these constitutional principles has been significantly solidified by the legacy of the case. The justices who presided over the initial proceedings left a record that continues to guide the court in its current deliberations, particularly regarding the complex intersection of traditional customary law and the external mandates of the United States constitutional framework. The case is frequently cited in legal briefs and scholarly analyses as a masterclass in jurisdictional balancing, illustrating how remote, unincorporated territory can uphold the highest standards of due process while remaining sensitive to the specific cultural and resource-based realities of its population. This judicial heritage is a source of pride for the local legal community, representing an intellectual achievement that has elevated the standing of the territorial courts and reinforced the legitimacy of the rule of law as the primary mechanism for social order and individual protection. As we consider the broader implications for Pacific Island nations and territories, the Vaitogi incident offers a universal lesson on the importance of institutional integrity and the necessity of resisting the influence of shadow actors who seek to subvert the common good through violence and fear. It provides a blueprint for how small communities can confront even the most powerful and entrenched criminal syndicates by leveraging the formal mechanisms of the state, ensuring that the evidence is secured, the testimony is protected, and the legal process is pursued to its final, definitive conclusion. The resolve shown by the prosecution, the bravery of the witnesses, and the unwavering dedication of the investigators form a triad of institutional excellence that remains the gold standard for public service in the territory. It is a legacy that transcends the specific details of the crime, speaking instead to the core values of justice, accountability, and the inherent worth of a peaceful, organized society. The story also emphasizes the critical role of medical professionals in the forensic process, an often overlooked facet of criminal justice that was brought to the forefront by the heroic efforts of the staff at the LBJ Tropical Medical Center. Their meticulous attention to the victim's needs, combined with their awareness of the broader legal significance of the physical evidence, turned a medical emergency into a triumph of the investigative process. This collaboration has since become a structural norm, with the medical community and the law enforcement agencies operating as integrated components of a single, unified response system. The recognition that every professional, from the emergency surgeon to the forensic examiner, plays a vital role in the pursuit of justice is a profound takeaway from the 1989 case, and one that continues to inform the high standards of professional practice currently observed across the territory's institutions. As we look toward the future, the lessons of the Vaitogi incident remain as relevant today as they were nearly 4 decades ago. The territory continues to face the challenges of growth, modernization, and the inevitable pressures that come with being a part of a global community. Yet, the foundations laid in the aftermath of that July night remain sturdy and reliable. The commitment to the rule of law, the resolve to protect the community from illegal influence, and the dedication to maintaining a transparent, fair legal system are the pillars upon which the future of American Samoa is being built. The memory of the shooting serves as a constant, watchful guard, a reminder of the vigilance that is the price of liberty and the necessity of courage in the maintenance of peace. In the final assessment, the saga of the 1989 shooting is a narrative of redemption and growth, where a singular act of violence served as the catalyst for the strengthening of an entire society. It is a story that honors the resilience of Samini Liu and the strength of the community he belonged to, reflecting the enduring truth that justice, when pursued with dedication and supported by the structural integrity of the law, will always prove stronger than the forces of chaos and fear. The village of Vaitogi, with its pristine coral reefs and its long history of cultural continuity, remains a symbol of this triumph, a testament to the power of a people who have chosen to define themselves not by the violence they endured, but by the peace they have secured and the justice they have upheld. The case lives on as a cornerstone of the territory's identity, a guiding light for future generations who will continue the vital, ongoing work of ensuring that their islands remain a sanctuary of law, order, and lasting tranquility, protected by the wisdom of the past and the unwavering commitment of the present to the fundamental principles of justice for all. The final chapter of this narrative regarding the Vaitogi incident of 1989 brings us to a place of profound reflection on the enduring power of the rule of law within the unique context of American Samoa. As we look back across the decades, it becomes increasingly clear that this case was far more than an isolated act of aggravated assault. It was a watershed moment that tested the core resilience of a traditional society confronted by the harsh, modern realities of imported violence. The legacy of this shooting is not merely captured in the judicial opinions or the cold statistics of the criminal justice system, but rather in the persistent, quiet strength of the community that refused to be defined by the actions of the Siamo family. The village of Vaitogi, with its rugged shoreline and the ancient, protective coral reefs, stands today as a living monument to the triumph of order over the corrosive influence of fear. The case serves as an essential, foundational pillar in the identity of the territory, a constant reminder that the stability of their home is a precious, hard-won commodity that requires the vigilance and active participation of every citizen. The investigative success that stemmed from the extraction of the .22 caliber bullet and the subsequent testimony of the medical team at the LBJ Tropical Medical Center continues to resonate as a powerful example of the necessity of professional collaboration. This success story has become a standard, integral part of the training for every new generation of law enforcement officers and forensic experts within the territory. It emphasizes the reality that justice is not found in grand gestures, but in the painstaking, meticulous collection of evidence, the respectful treatment of victims, and the absolute adherence to the procedural standards that ensure a fair trial for all. By honoring the investigative dedication of those who served in 1989, the territory maintains a high bar of excellence that protects the integrity of its institutions and ensures that justice remains accessible, reliable, and firmly rooted in the empirical facts of every case. This legacy of institutional competence is the primary deterrent against the return of the syndicate-style violence that once threatened to undermine the peace of the islands. Furthermore, the High Court's role as the definitive protector of the constitutional framework has been permanently strengthened by the resolution of the 1989 legal battles. The court's ability to navigate the complex, often contradictory pressures of maintaining traditional cultural autonomy while upholding the rigid mandates of the U.S. legal system is a masterclass in judicial balancing. The precedents established during this period have provided a sense of continuity and predictability that allows the society to progress without the constant fear of arbitrary intervention or the erosion of its governing principles. The High Court today operates with a heightened awareness of its responsibility to act as a bridge between the past and the future, ensuring that the legal evolution of the territory remains consistent with its commitment to human rights, equality, and the preservation of the rule of law. This judicial wisdom is the silent foundation upon which the territory builds its daily life, offering a reliable, neutral ground where conflicts are resolved through deliberation rather than through the use of lethal, illegal, and destructive force. The personal narrative of Samini Liu, meanwhile, has transcended his own experience to become an archetype of local resilience. His life, following his recovery and the conclusion of the case, is a quiet, powerful testament to the capacity for human healing and the importance of civic courage. By choosing to face his aggressors within the halls of justice, he provided his community with the moral permission to refuse intimidation. This individual act of bravery, supported by the protective framework of the state, was the spark that ignited a broader, more profound shift in the social consciousness of Vaetogi. It showed the people that their local customs, while vital for maintaining social cohesion, could be bolstered and protected by the formal structures of the law. This synthesis of cultural tradition and state-sanctioned legal process is the true mark of a maturing, modern society that values the safety and dignity of every individual, regardless of their background or their position within the social order. As we assess the current reality of American Samoa in 2026, it is evident that the territory has successfully navigated the most challenging aspects of its transition into a modern legal environment. The port security measures, the increased awareness regarding maritime trade, and the robust cooperation between diverse government agencies are all clear reflections of a society that has learned from its past and is committed to a more secure and transparent future. The Siamo Syndicate, once a symbol of pervasive, untouchable power, is now a historical relic, a memory of a time when the community was forced to confront its own vulnerabilities. Today, the territory operates with a sophisticated understanding of the global risks that accompany its geographic position, and it does so with a resolve that is backed by nearly 40 years of consistent, successful judicial practice. This institutional strength is the greatest protection the people have, and it is a direct consequence of the path that was clear during the 1989 investigation and trial. The philosophy of justice that currently permeates American Samoa is one of inclusivity and accountability. It recognizes that the health of the community is dependent on the ability of the legal system to address the grievances of every citizen with impartiality and thoroughness. The lessons of the Vaetogi incident have permeated the education of the youth, who are taught to value the importance of their local customs while understanding the necessity of the laws that protect them from harm. This dual education fosters a citizenry that is both culturally proud and legally savvy, capable of navigating the complex demands of the modern world while maintaining a firm hold on the values that define their identity. The case is thus an essential element of the civic education of the island, helping to create a culture of transparency and mutual responsibility that is the ultimate safeguard against the return of the shadows of 1989. In conclusion, the Vaetogi shooting of 1989 is a story that has reached its definitive and meaningful end, leaving behind a territory that is stronger, more united, and more resilient than it ever was before. The path toward resolution was a long and arduous one, marked by suffering, by intense conflict, and by the weight of constitutional responsibility. Yet, it is a path that was worth traveling, for it led the community to a place of greater understanding, sharper focus, and a deeper appreciation for the peace that they have collectively worked to secure. The memory of the event continues to be a source of strength, a beacon that reminds every resident that their home is a place where the rule of law prevails over the rule of fear. As the future unfolds, the territory will continue to draw upon the wisdom gained from this historical chapter, ensuring that its progress is built upon the solid, unchanging foundation of justice, truth, and the unwavering commitment to the protection of all its people. The legacy of the Vaitogi shooting is now forever linked to the beautiful, expansive landscape of American Samoa, a territory that has proven its capacity to overcome, to adapt, and to excel in the most difficult of circumstances. The case stands as a reminder that the pursuit of justice is not a singular event, but a continuous process that requires the dedication, courage, and integrity of every person who calls these islands home. The finality of this account reflects the stability that has been achieved, the lessons that have been learned, and the peace that has been restored. It is a story of a community that stood against the darkness, sought the protection of the law, and ultimately emerged into a future defined by the light of transparency and the enduring, unbreakable strength of a shared commitment to a just and equitable society for all, forever standing firm against the tides of violence and ensuring that the quiet beauty of their land remains an unblemished sanctuary for generations to come. The resonance of the 1989 Vaitogi incident within the contemporary fabric of American Samoa is not defined by the violence of the act, but by the profound institutional maturation that followed in its wake. As we reflect upon the journey from the dark, coral-lined shores of that evening to the established legal security of 2026, it becomes clear that the territory underwent a fundamental shift in its perception of justice and communal responsibility. The case of the .22 caliber handgun, once a terrifying symbol of an unchecked criminal syndicate's reach, has been transformed into a historical artifact, a cautionary tale that serves as a cornerstone for the modern territorial legal system. This transformation was not accidental. It was the result of a deliberate, sustained effort by the judiciary, the police, and the medical community to ensure that the vulnerability exposed by the ambush was systematically dismantled. The legacy of this shooting is the construction of a more transparent, robust, and accountable society that values the sanctity of the law as the primary guarantor of its peaceful existence and cultural continuity. The evolution of the law enforcement apparatus, particularly in its approach to maritime security and the regulation of illegal imports, stands as one of the most tangible outcomes of the post-1989 era. By acknowledging the reality that the island's economic lifeline through the fishing industry was also a potential vector for criminal contraband, the government instituted a more integrated, intelligence-led approach to port safety. This evolution moved the territory away from the reactive, often fragmented policing of the late 1980s toward a centralized, collaborative framework that emphasizes the seamless sharing of information between customs, local police, and federal partners. The Vaitogi shooting, by highlighting the ease with which sophisticated criminal actors could exploit the territory's geographic isolation, served as the ultimate catalyst for this systemic upgrade. Today, the vigilance maintained at the ports is a direct, though silent, tribute to the lessons learned from that incident, ensuring that the peace of the village is protected by a sophisticated, proactive wall of institutional vigilance. Moreover, the legal framework that governs American Samoa has been irrevocably shaped by the constitutional scrutiny applied to this specific case. The defense attorneys, in their attempt to challenge the arrest and investigation, unwittingly provided the High Court with a unique opportunity to define the parameters of due process within the unincorporated territory. The resulting jurisprudence has become an indispensable guide for all subsequent legal proceedings, providing the clarity and certainty that are essential for the maintenance of a stable society. The court's role in this was not merely to adjudicate a criminal act, but to weave a protective constitutional tapestry that respects the island's unique traditional heritage, while ensuring that the fundamental rights of every individual are protected against the potential overreach of the state. This judicial balance, refined through the fire of the Vaitogi legal battles, remains the primary mechanism for resolving conflicts in a territory where traditional customs and modern legal principles must coexist in a delicate, necessary equilibrium. The medical center, the LBJ Tropical Medical Center, continues to operate with the same forensic precision that was so pivotal in securing justice during the trial. The professionalization of trauma care, coupled with the standardized handling of forensic evidence, has created a reliable link between the medical front lines and the judicial chamber. This collaboration is now an ingrained part of the territory's infrastructure, ensuring that no evidence is lost and no path toward justice is blocked by administrative or procedural oversight. For the medical professionals who work there today, the legacy of the 1989 shooting is a constant reminder of their role as crucial witnesses to the truth. Their meticulous attention to detail during the initial care of the victim and the subsequent documentation of the injuries served to create an evidentiary record that rendered the defense's challenges largely ineffective, proving that a transparent and accurate medical report is, in itself, a powerful instrument of justice. For the community of Vaitogi, the long-term impact has been a steady reclamation of the village's reputation as a place of peace and traditional values. The fear that once lingered in the shadows of the coastal road has been replaced by a communal confidence, bolstered by the knowledge that the authorities are both willing and able to confront any threat to their tranquility. This newfound confidence is not a sign of complacency. Rather, it is a testament to the village's resilience and its deep-seated commitment to the rule of law. The people of Vaitogi have shown that they are capable of absorbing the shock of a violent incursion, utilizing the formal legal process to hold the perpetrators accountable, and moving forward as a stronger, more unified collective. This is a journey that has defined the village's identity for over 3 decades, shaping its growth and influencing the way it interacts with the broader territorial community. In the broader context of Pacific Island territories, the Vaitogi case is increasingly cited as a success story of institutional resilience. It demonstrates that the size or isolation of a community does not dictate its ability to defend its values against organized criminal elements. By investing in the integrity of its legal, medical, and law enforcement institutions, American Samoa has created a model that is both adaptive and enduring. The ability to reconcile traditional cultural structures with the formal requirements of constitutional justice is a challenge that many such territories face, and the American Samoan experience offers a valuable, practical example of how this can be achieved with success. The case serves as an enduring reminder that the strength of a society lies in its institutions and in the shared belief of its people that justice is a universal value, one that must be protected, nurtured, and upheld by the collective resolve of the community. As we look toward the future, the lessons of the Vaitogi shooting remain as salient as they were on that day in 1989. The territory continues to grow, and with that growth come new challenges, new technologies, and new complexities that will require the same dedication and clarity of purpose that were demonstrated during the trial. The commitment to maintaining a transparent legal system, the vigilance required to protect the ports, and the ongoing investment in the professional development of the civil service are all essential components of the territory's strategy for enduring stability. The memory of the event is a guardian of this mission, ensuring that the complacency that once allowed the Siamo family to operate is never permitted to return. The territory remains a sanctuary of the rule of law, not because it is immune to the pressures of the modern world, but because it has learned how to confront them with the full force of its institutional integrity. In final contemplation of the saga of the 1989 shooting, we find a narrative of enduring hope. The case, which began with the sound of a single, devastating gunshot in the dark, ended with the triumph of the law and the restoration of a community's peace. It is a testament to the fact that justice, while often difficult to attain and slow to arrive, is a necessary and attainable goal for any society that refuses to compromise its commitment to the dignity of its people. The legacy of Samini Liu and the justice he eventually received is etched into the history of the territory, serving as a beacon of truth and a model of resilience for those who will continue to lead the territory toward a brighter, more secure future. The Vaitogi shooting of 1989 will forever remain a cornerstone of American Samoan history, not for the tragedy it caused, but for the profound institutional and societal strength that was born from it, forever standing as a monument to the enduring, unbreakable spirit of a people who have proven that their islands are, and shall always remain, a sanctuary for the rule of law, protected by the wisdom of their past and the unwavering commitment of the present to the fundamental, non-negotiable principles of justice, equity, and lasting, communal peace for all who reside under the tropical sun of the South Pacific.